So, welcome everybody to one of David Beatty's Board Compass and Board Chair events. This event is on the sacred task of any board, and a task that is for the board alone, which is hiring the CEO. David needs no introduction, but let me give you a couple of points for his background. He's been on 40 boards. He's been the chair of numerous amounts of those boards. He was the founding director and founding chair of the David and Sharon Johnston Center for Corporate Governance at the University of Toronto. And he still to this day travels around the world, operating in many jurisdictions to provide corporate governance, strategy, and commentary on all business matters of the day. He's been awarded the Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by the ICGN. So David, thank you very much I'm Quinn Lawson. I've been working with David for the last few years. My company's Community Company, and thanks everyone for attending. David, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much, Quinn. And welcome, everybody. This is a really important topic, and I'm going to be plus or minus a half an hour, and I'm going to do this with some PowerPoint slides. Now, Quinn, can you confirm that you've got that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, good. So, the normal model of a publicly traded company is to have the shareholders elect the board selects the management, and the critical part of that is beginning with a CEO. And I call that, and I've always called that, the sacred task. If you get this wrong, not a lot, if anything, is going to work within the company. So you've got to make sure you leave no stone unturned when you go about it. And we'll talk about how we do this today. But it is a tough job to get right. This comes from McKinsey. The failure rates across different time horizons, that's like 30 to 40% failure rate in the first 18 months there. And then the external hires are actually a little less, or 15%. But on average, a CEO is not going to be chosen very intelligently by the look of that. 40% failing within their first 18 months. That's incredible. And when asked by McKinsey, do you got a plan for a formal succession? Some did, a third, and 2/3 had no plan. And when they asked, who have you got inside who might take this over? Only half, basically, 54%, said they had inside candidate development. 39 said they had very little, and 7 said none, but only half. So it's pretty hard to believe that in such an important job as the selection of your CEO, there's really kind of sort of a haphazard approach to it that's not very serious. Another study that was done by Stanford on how boards are doing in this arena, they surveyed, I think, something in the order of 2,000 directors, which would be 200 companies on the S&P 500. Only half could name a permanent successor if required. Only half, same as the number that McKinsey came up with. 39% said we have nobody inside. Any good? Well, if you don't, why don't you hire them tomorrow? Like, hello. And on average, and this is an unbelievably low number, on average, boards spend 2 hours a year on succession. If that were 20, I'd still be disappointed, 10 times as much. So boards really are not taking this job as seriously as they should. They are not doing well at all, in my view. So here's a 3-step practical approach for you to think about this job and to hopefully get the right person into it. Firstly, think about core capabilities. What's actually different about this job than any other job in the company? Head of sales, chief financial officer, what is different? And then you've got to say, what does our company need? Now, Jonathan Goodman of Monitor Deloitte uses the words fit for circumstance, like different circumstances will require different skill sets. So you have to be concerned not only with the generic capabilities of anybody in the CEO job, that's what I call the core capabilities, but also what do we think our company needs at the current time? Then you combine those two and you say, what personal attributes should we be seeking in order to maximize our chance that we make a good hiring decision? So that's what I'm going to do, take you through the core capabilities, the fit for circumstance, a few examples, and we're looking for attributes. Just stop for 1 minute. I'll give you 30 seconds to think about some things you might believe would be different about the CEO's job. I'll give you 30 seconds to do that. What are the differences, any difference in the CEO's job? And Quinn, you might see if there's any chats that come up.
Feel free to drop your answers into the chat. Uh,
Yeah.
Nizar here says leadership. Ken says understanding the changing environment. Duke
Okay.
Duke says absolute accountability,
Sure.
innovation,
Yeah.
ability to lead, and culture. Vision, double vision. So we got two visions in a row.
Yeah.
Ultimately responsible for performance, setting the tone. That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Um, not an expert at everything, but good at pulling team of experts together.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. That's what the head of one of the companies I had in my class said. If I'm not the dumbest person in the room, we're not going to have a good meeting. So, okay, let me go on and just talk about some of the things that I think are important. This is A.G. Lafley, head of P&G, twice as it happens. And he said, it's a jump shift. When I moved from where I was running a multi-billion-dollar brand to become CEO of Procter and Gamble, my job changed entirely. It had nothing to do with what I did earlier. Sir David Walker in the UK, he ran the British sort of review of the banking crisis and then ended up as chairman of the board of Barclays. And he said, frankly, it's impossible to be the CEO of a large global franchise like this. It's just too different, too hard. And then Mark Saunders, who was the chief of police of Toronto, I went and interviewed him, I don't know, 6 months after he'd taken the job. He said, David, it's a completely different job than anything I've ever done in the police force before. So, from a wide variety of opinions, most of these executives in these positions say, hey, this is different. And one of them said, when you become the final decision maker, everything changes. And that's sort of where I start. So, you're looking for somebody who's going to be in a job they've never done before. Interesting. So, here's what I think is different. Firstly, upward. You have to find a comfort zone with the owner or the owners or the board. You've got to learn how to partner with the chair, and you got to deal with the board and all its committees. You might have been at board meetings. Head of HR is at board meetings. The head of finances at board meetings, but they are never at the board meeting in terms of the responsibility of the entire framework of the board resting on their shoulders. Outward, you have to meet and know the investors. You have to meet and know the regulators who oversee you. And you should try and understand all the stakeholders. And there are more and more and more of them coming at you from ever more divergent directions. And downward, you're the chief external officer as well as the chief strategist and capital allocator. Remember that slogan, the buck stops here. And you're also in charge of building the team. These are all very different jobs than anybody has had before within the company. And on top of all that, I would assert that you are the head of state. You are the external voice of the company, and internally, you're the tone at the top. Everybody in the company is going to be looking up to see how you think, talk, work, and act, what you value, what you don't value. You're the internal tone at the top. Now, those are all major differences from any job currently being done by any executive in any company. I talked to the CEO of one of our major banks, actually, and I said, is this a different job? And he laughed. He said, of course, it's a very, very different job than I've ever done before. He said, upwardly, I'm on the phone at least 2 times a week with the chair, and I meet with him face to face monthly. And if anything happens untoward, it's the first phone call I make. And if he's got a problem, I'm the first phone call he makes. So that relationship is hugely important to me. Outwardly, he said, I can't even go to the grocery store and not be recognized. As the CEO of a major corporation in this country, you are never off. Period, full stop. This is 24/7, 365. I used to be able to go home and go out and play golf and just not be recognized. No longer. And downward, he said, my big risk is not to get swept away in the river. And I said, what does that actually mean? He said, there's not a single executive who visits my office who doesn't have two or three ideas of how I can help him or her do his or her job better. And all I have to do is say yes to half a dozen of them, and my life is gone. But that's not my job. That's why A.G. Lafley said CEO for me stands for Chief External Officer. I got 13 executives who run multi-billion dollar global businesses. My job is not to try and help them do their jobs better. My job is to determine what is happening externally that could impact this company in fundamental ways in the future. So, big risk not to get swept away in the river. Just say no to others. And he said, this executive, I'm also held accountable for everything that happens in here. The board of directors looks to me as being the responsible person for absolutely everything that goes on. So, in that sense, I'm the chief execution officer. The buck stops here always. If you take a look, this came out of the Harvard Business Review 2018. They spent a ton of time analyzing CEO time investment by 15-minute intervals. So on average, 62 and a half hours a week. So you lose your life for sure. There's no 40-hour week with weekends off. Um, Time alone, this one is really interesting, almost 30%. And it was a really important component of Secretary Rogers' regime when he was the Secretary of State for Reagan. He said to his secretary, Monday mornings are mine. I need to think. Two people can talk to me, President of the United States or my wife. Otherwise, nobody. I need time to think. And that's supposed to have led to the thawing of relationships between Gorbachev and Reagan, which gave rise to the end of the Cold War. So meeting time alone, I think Bill Gates goes off for a month a year in a cabin, nowhere, just to think. But in the core agenda, 21% on strategy, 16 on culture, functional business reviews, people and relationships, and that's a whole bunch, one, two, three different things there. The core agenda, unfolding developments, a third of his time, have to do how you communicate face to face versus phone versus electronic, where they work, headquarters or non-headquarters outside, scheduled versus spontaneous time for stuff that comes in over the transom. And most CEOs spend a ton of time with a variety of people. Direct reports, senior managers, other employees is 70%. 16% are with business partners, 5% is with the board, 9% with outside groups. I mean, there's a million things to do with your day. 24 hours is never enough for a CEO. So it's a very different job in terms of time investments and where you invest that time. So in a charity CEO, it's more or less the same thing. I interviewed 5 charity CEOs, and there's a much more important upward finding to be comfort with all of your stakeholder groups. There's sort of much less discipline of board versus management, much more elastic boundaries. Partnering with the chair continues to be critical, and the board does. Meet and know key donors. It's sort of like the stakeholder thing for a publicly traded company, and understand their interests. And then you have the same challenges. You're the chief external officer as well as the chief executive officer and the chief team builder. So we say the job is different. That implies what with respect to the skill sets you have to come to this job? Um, Attribute is of a person, if you're confused about the word attribute, characteristic that's regarded as an inherent part of them. These are the things that people do themselves. Personality traits, kindness, honesty, intelligence, courage, creativity, skills and abilities, being a good communicator, your age, gender, nationality, previous profession, and are you abstract or rational? And in essence, the bottom line is attributes are the different aspects that combine to define and describe an individual, and we are all different. And so we've got to work pretty hard at understanding what that person is, as opposed to just what that person's resume may be. So I don't know that these are certainly not comprehensive, but upwardly, to be good and see things outside, you have to be self-aware. You have to be open and transparent. People are talking to you about things you don't understand or you don't agree with. So you have to have a very embedded capability to listen, then to evaluate, and ultimately to decide. Outwardly, you've got to be empathetic. I don't know how many of you run into people in any environment who give you a cold stare. It doesn't give you a very good feeling. And we do know that smiling makes you feel better as well as the person you're talking to feel better. So that's a good reason to smile. You've got to be a persuasive presenter, but also a very disciplined listener, balancing the two ears against the one mouth. And downwardly, there's a ton of stuff. In my view, you have to have a huge intellectual energy, a relentless curiosity about what is happening in the business, what is happening to our business, what is happening to our customers, and what's happening in the generic environment around us. And because you're dealing with so many uncertain activities, you have to have an ability to cope with those uncertainties, ability to delay a decision until another thing happens, and then an ability to leap, to be improving your company industry dynamics. And to do that, I think you have to be an experienced decision maker with a track record of success. And that's solid judgment. Has this person been in a position before where they've run teams of people to accomplish certain tasks, and how did that go? Okay. And the head of state, magic royal jelly. Um, Got to be a really charismatic speaker. And in my view, I put a big box here for all of them. You have to be passionate about the opportunity. If you come to be a CEO, you lose your life. 24/7 just isn't enough time for you to do all of the things demanded in this job. So there's a lot of stuff to look for. Um, and that's the core side. And no matter who you hire, those abilities and those attributes are going to be vital to success. On the other hand, maybe there's something in our business that means we've really got to reach outside more and change to a skill set that more properly reflects the needs of our company. Could be massive cost cutting, industry consolidation, new product growth, expansion into China, new senior team, and on and on and on and on. Here's an example. Microsoft in 2014 was under Steve Ballmer. And the conclusion about his leadership was it was struggling with the shift from PC-based software to cloud computing and mobile platforms, and falling further and further and further behind competitors like Google. So they hired Satya Nadella and trained him. He was groomed for over a decade to be the Microsoft CEO through deliberate strategic planning. And said, Ballmer, we've been growing this guy for 10, 15 years. This guy is really talented. So he became the CEO, and since he became CEO in 2014, Microsoft's stock had increased nearly tenfold, with a 27% annual growth rate, ending a 14-year period under Steve of near zero growth. I mean, that's an extraordinary transformation. Planned, hired from within, and dedicated resource. So this is not casual. This is not waking up Thursday and saying, oh, that's right, Steve's leaving on Monday. What are we going to do? This is something that took a decade to unfold. GlaxoSmithKline, scientific pharmaceutical company, wanted to get more into foodstuffs. So they wanted more commercial execution and they wanted some consumer business. So they moved from Sir Andrew Whitty in 2017 to Dame Emma Walmsley to try to take them out of pure science, because that was seen as the fit for circumstance, into more consumer goods. Nestle, on the other hand, went exactly the other way. It wanted more science in its consumer goods products, and it wanted to move to be midway from food to farmer. So they reached outside to Ulf Mark Schneider, who'd run a healthcare group, and he was the first external CEO hired by Nestle in the last 100 years. I mean, really broke a pattern. So there was a clear need felt by the Nestle board. We've got to get ourselves more into the science and nutrition end of foodstuffs rather than just making candy bars. Sadly, that did not work too well. And since that time, there's been another fit for circumstance transformation in Nestle. They've gone back to promoting to chief executives those who are in the marketing business of consumer goods. And in this case, they went in 2024 back to Laurent Freixe. So fit for circumstance does not last forever. And you've got to ask yourself, even as the chairman of the board, am I fit for circumstance given where we are today? So they do change over time. So those are the core capabilities, which I think maybe the balance of them will shift one year to the next, but the substance of them won't. Whereas fit for circumstance is going to be something that is likely to transform. So Nadella and Walmsley were both insiders and fit for purpose as it happened. And Schneider was not an insider, but he's moved back to Laurent Freixe as an insider. So back to food. Okay, core and fit. So what skills and attributes help increase your odds? These two researchers studied over 300 successions in the United States. Stephen Kaplan at the Chicago Booth School and Morton Sorensen at Columbia. 300 CEO successions over quite a long period of time. They came away with one admonition for boards. Hey, you place too much value on the interpersonal skills and charisma. Charisma across the boardroom table may be a necessary component for a CEO, but it's certainly not sufficient to select them. But you get swept away by, oh God, I really love Fred. I thought Sally was an amazing interview. Oh, I really loved her. And Mr. Buffett is talking about leadership. He said you get a guy or a woman in charge of it. They're personal. The directors like them. They don't know what they're doing, but they do know how to put on an appearance. That's the biggest single danger. So for Mr. Investor himself, who must have chosen 100 CEOs, his wisdom is the same as the two academics. Do not get swept away by charisma and charisma alone. So you've got to find out a lot more about these people, less value on a proven track record of success, finding people who will attest to the validity of the person's competence, who've been with them in other environments. You can never do too much. Here's an example, real life example, publicly traded company, not in North America. I know the CEO, founder, chair very well. He phoned me up and said, "Oh, David, great news, great news. I've got a successor." And I said, "Oh, that's wonderful, Sir Michael. That's absolutely great. Tell me what you did." He said, "Oh, we all interviewed him." And I said, "And, it's David. I told you, we all interviewed him. We had lots of senior people on the board, like the former head of Qantas, and so he was great." I said, "Sir Michael, we are in time zones that have your 12 noon, my 12 midnight. I am on my knees in my office, my arms in a praying mode, and I'm begging you, please get some external evaluation of this person's competence, his incredible capability, charisma across the boardroom table is but one attribute of many you need to create a successful succession to yourself." Finally persuaded him to do it, and they went to Rohrer, Hibbler, and Replogle, who've done 1 million of these, and they say, well, listen, we'll test them against 3 criteria. General reasoning, which is the intellect and problem-solving skills and ability to learn new concepts quickly. Verbal critical reasoning, which is making sense of stuff that's written down and being able to analyze and even create documents. And then numerical critical reasoning, which is the capacity to interpret numbers and data into some more complex mathematical, but also into general management. So these are the 3 key modes that they tested this individual in. Question, 75th percentile on general reasoning. Is that good enough? Is that good enough to take over as the CEO of your company? Yes or no? I don't know. 75 sounds pretty good, but not really great. So we go to verbal critical reasoning. Oh, 37th percentile. And then we went to numerical critical reasoning, the 5th percentile. Yikes! I mean, that's the actual true life measure of the candidate that was about to be hired to take over from the founder's CEO chair. So the conclusion of the consulting firm was hugely diplomatic. It said, taken together, the assessed intellectual ability results offer somewhat limited support for his potential reasoning aptitude and critical thinking capability, and the offer was never presented. So don't get swept away. That's lesson number one. Don't get swept away. Make sure you understand who this person really is in action. Follow up every single job with a reference. Don't let any stone be unturned. This is my kind of slogan from Euripides. Your core fiduciary responsibility is to get the right person in this job. So in seeking to do that, leave nothing unexamined. Nothing. Um, a side point here, Harvard every couple of years takes 1,000 CEOs, winnows it down to their top 100 based on performance and something else. I'm assuming they're doing a reasonable job of that. And you'll see the percentage promoted from within 86, 87, 87. And also, interestingly, the age at which these top CEOs become CEOs. And then, if you get them right, they seem to stay forever. So, hiring from within would increase your odds. This is Spencer Stewart. Last year, 2023, 77% were insiders, just opposed to 80, about the same. So your odds are significantly increased if you hire from within. And Dominic Barton, who when he ran McKinsey globally used to see 2, 3 CEOs a week. So that's, I don't know, that's 100 a year anyhow. And he was there for 7 years. So he's probably met 1,000 CEOs. He came away with his basic insight to all of that is you've got to put your people first, period. And he said we talk much too much about a capital plan and not nearly enough about a people plan. There should be no business plan without a talent plan. And I think most boards fail and fail pretty miserably at investing enough of their precious time in talent, talent succession, and ultimately hiring the CEO. I'm going to send this to you. Quinn's got a copy to send it to you. It was March, April, Harvard Business Review 2021. MasterCard making the change, not from Richard and AJ, but from Richard and AJ to Michael Meebeck, who they've brought in 2021. And as I said in the previous slide here, Richard said, talking to AJ, it's not easy to replace a CEO who has tripled your company's revenues, increased its net income sixfold, and grown its market cap from 30 billion to more than 300. But that's what AJ did. And the two of them have talked from the very beginning about how long he would stay and when they would start serious work on ensuring there was a successor. So in that article, it talks about a number of points. And I think the one that I would push on first is over-invest in candidate development, especially the top tier. Your odds are going to be much enhanced unless there's a fit-for-purpose circumstance that says we can't hire from within. If you actually work with your executives and invest more than 2 hours a year on worrying about their training. So, solve for tomorrow is another big one down there. And make sure you are getting the best talent in your organization. Some of our large institutions in Canada, the CEOs have been guilty of laying off a ton of people who were very competent, but who I guess in the end they did not enjoy working with. That leaves the board pretty naked when it comes to selection if the CEO is firing all kinds of competent executives. Where was the chair in discussing that with them? I mean, this should not be allowed to happen. So we'll send you the article. A last point here. I gave this, every organization will sort of have a Gaussian curve of whether everybody in there is wonderful or whether everybody in there is going to eat you raw. And I show this to a survivor of the 1994 Rwandan massacres that had been just catastrophic. And he said to me, which I thought very interesting, David, if you put a saint in as the CEO, you get somebody absolutely over time, it's going to pull the organization slightly to saintliness. If you put a devil in as the CEO, almost immediately, that center of gravity is going to move strongly left to join the new value system. Takeaway from that is hire slow. Make sure you know this person you're getting and fire fast if you find out that this is what's happening. Because then you're over there, and then by definition, you can't get back to where you started at unless it's a decade long with a saint. So it's really, really important to know who the human being is you are hiring. It's not the resume, it's the person. Now, a question was asked prior to this. I think your job is not finished as a board with your selection. You still got to worry about maintaining relationships or losing, I guess, those who were not successful in succession. You have to make a decision. When do we switch to actual CEOs? Do we put the old CEO on the board? That's generally not done, although I did that in one family holding company where it worked out really, really well. So that is a decision you ought to consider. And lastly, if we believe in that Rwanda shift, what happens in the company when we have our new CEO in place? Everybody in the company is looking up. Everybody's talking to everybody else. The headhunters are phoning every senior executive saying, I see you got a new CEO. Do you want to leave? So if you're talking about financial services, there's a huge market in what's happening under XYZ's new regime. Why doesn't the board keep itself tapped into that marketplace to understand the impact of its new CEO before it's too late to make a change? So I don't think your job is finished with the hiring. I think you have a continuity, a necessity to make sure that inside the organization, the operational culture is moving in a direction that you find not offensive. Culture is what people do when no one's looking, but they are all looking at the boss to say what culture is valued today. And you can see that happening in every newscast every day when you deal with the United States these days. Okay, the other place to go is to get somebody in the private equity business. This comes from Dave Samuels at Birch Hill. Private equity Dave's hired 90 CEOs, and he said, I think 60 of them worked out pretty well, but that's a third failure rate. So they went through a really disciplined process and came up with this grid called MDICE. Every partner interviews every candidate for every CEO-ship against this framework. And I'll just talk about insight, vision. What vision does this person have? What choices will they make about their time? And Roger Martin teamed up with A.G. Lafley again in the May-June issue of the Harvard Business Review this year. And both of them were asked, how did you invest your time? And both of them replied, we tried to invest our time where we individually had a strategic advantage over the rest of our teams. And you can read the articles to see what that strategic advantage was. But the point is that they were thinking, as CEO, what can I do to enhance the progress of this organization that nobody else is doing today? Because I don't want to be repetitive. I don't want to get swept down the river. My job is the externality and keeping us competitive in the long term. So that's the motivation, determination, insight, and as Seneca the Younger said, a philosopher from ancient Rome, it's not about winning every argument. It's about choosing the ones which deserve our energy. You've got to be able to make that selection wisely in order to progress your organization. Curiosity, something I value hugely, and engagement is the person good with people. So this is another scale, another card, another interview guide that you'll get when we send you our slides from private equity. And private equity tends to be pretty good at thinking through what it is we need to run this organization, a blend both of the core capabilities and our fit for circumstance. So that's it, Quinn. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's the selection of the CEO, the sacred job of the board. And I'll now give it back to you for any Q&A.
Please start dropping your questions in the chat. We have one quick one from Robin here. What was the name of the firm that conducted the CEO review?
RH&R, Rohrer, Hibbeler, and Replogle. They've been around forever. I used to use them when I was running Westons in the 1980s.
Right on. Next question. If you go internal, should you compare with external candidates?
Yep. You should always get as broad a canvas as you can. So hiring a search firm at some point in the process is usually a good idea, and it's certainly recommended in the article I'm giving you on the MasterCard transition.
Excellent. Thank you. Gerard. Oh, here we go. I knew they were going to trickle in. What is the worst CEO hire you're aware of, and what were the reasons? No names necessary.
Oh, that's too hard. Yeah, I think of a couple of Canadian banks, so I won't go any further, but they've made some horrendous CEO selection decisions.
Thank you, Russell, for the spicy question there. I guess Duke with a follow up. Was it Microsoft during the Bomber to Nadala change? And you nailed it. What circumstance caused the change in your view?
The skill set of the leader, and his ability, I think, to be part of the next frontier, not looking over his shoulder at what made us great in the first place, but what will make us great in the longer term. It's the next vision, the new vision, the thinking differently. And I think Mr. Balmer just got caught running the railways as normal and fell further and further behind, but made a brilliant decision in his work on the selection.
There's a really good video of Satya Nadella as a product marketing manager, his first job at Microsoft, which was very low on the rungs of him presenting a product. And you
Hmm.
how he was quite an internal hire and moved up the ranks fast. From Miranda Keating, given the importance of succession planning, once you have a CEO, what oversight should the board have of their C-suite hires?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think boards typically leave it alone because it might be deemed to be meddling into the micromanagement field. But at the TD Bank, for example, when John Thompson was the chair and Ed Clark the CEO, they agreed on a series of dinners, pre-board dinners, which is a common enough occurrence. But they had him in a cycle. Firstly, it would be Ed alone, CEO alone. He'd go to the various tables of the board, tell them what was on their mind, listen to their questions. The second board dinner would be direct reports to Ed without Ed. And so they would stay at one table for one part of the meal and then move tables. So you got a chance as a director to actually meet, find out the pet's name of the senior HR officer. The third one was the direct reports to Ed without either two ranks in front. So you were now meeting third level executives. And then the fourth on the rotation was with high pots. So just with a regular movement of the board gave the board directors over time a real ability to see a little bit more of what was going on. Now, if you're on the HR committee, I think you have an opportunity to go deeper with people below the senior C-suite level. That's part of your job, and to get to know them more intimately so you really can talk about them.
David just summarized a bunch of content from his Board Compass book that we've been talking about over the last few months. And I think one thing you say is, are you being fed what you are given in the boardroom? Is basically the summary of that.
No, no, it works the other way, Quinn. You eat what you're fed in the boardroom. You don't have a choice. So if you actually want to find out what's going on in the operation, you got to get out of the boardroom and into the field. And I've always used the Wells Fargo example. How could the board of directors of Wells Fargo not know that over 1,200 people were suing the company, suing Wells Fargo for wrongful dismissal because the only way they could keep their jobs was to break the law and create accounts that didn't exist, millions of them. The board apparently never knew that. And John Stumpf, as the CEO, kept them in the dark. And, that was the mushroom theory of management, keep them in the dark and throw you know what on them. And he was very successful at Wells Fargo in suppressing all kinds of information that might have made those directors a little more aware of the operating culture that really was in place in Wells Fargo.
Next question from Samantha. Can the CEO review be adequately managed internally, or should it always be an external party? If the former, is there an ICD supported framework, or um, I guess so? Um, you have brought up in this presentation the idea of an external third party for doing the CEO review, hire externally as a component of that.
Yeah.
Um, and is it, I guess, I'm going to move on to the next question. I think this was addressed, Samantha. Um, From Allison, once the CEO hire is made, do you build the criteria into ongoing performance assessment? So how do you bridge the hiring criteria for what the business needs with the probably the compensation and the performance after the fact?
Well, compensation is a whole nother arena. Presumably, you're going to pay for performance, but the way in which that's done in the United States is all through shares, so it's completely distorted. You should be overseeing results, performance. If you don't, the activist investors will see it, and or your shareholders will see it. So there's a lot more pressure on boards now to hold management accountable for outcomes than there ever was 5, 10 years ago. Because if you don't hold them accountable as a board, the activists are going to be on you if you're in the bottom of your peer group, and then you're going to have the stewards of the ownership. And there's something like 40% of every large publicly traded company in the United States, in the UK, and in Australia and China are owned by the ETF funds, State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock. You are going to get yourself voted against as a director if you chair the comp committee, if you chair the HR committee, if you chair the audit committee. And there are problems that arise that you are not dealing with as a board. So there's a lot more externalities in having to cope with your oversight functions. It's not so easy to say, wasn't that good a quarter, but we really like Quinn. He's a nice guy, and I'm sure he'll do better next quarter. I'm going to play golf. We know we can't do that anymore, Quinn.
Here's a question related to smaller organizations and CEO succession. If you don't have a viable internal candidate internally, how do you go about doing an external search without making it awkward with the current CEO?
Well, I think the chair and the CEO have to have discussions. Again, if you look at the MasterCard thing, it was a big discussion 5 years before they made the change. We're looking forward to your retirement. And as we do, who have we got to replace you? What do we think they need for the next generation of leadership? It has to be an open discussion. And in that sense, I would then say as chair, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak to Russ Reynolds or one of the search firms and just sort of begin to canvass with you some of the possibilities of other leadership from outside, and we'll do it together. Because you're not going to live forever. I'm sorry, Quinn. You look very young, you look very competent, but I'm pretty confident you're not going to live forever. So at some point, we're going to change the leadership at Community and Company.
Question from Christine. How do you feel about coaches for new CEOs? So I would say this is more related to, I want to go maybe bigger with that question and say onboarding. How does the onboarding process?
Well, I think they're different. I think every CEO would love to have somebody they can talk to, a mentor. And so there are a few consultants whose names I will not promote, but who do nothing but that. They talk to the CEO, and the CEO can be frustrated with his or her board, with his or her chair. I mean, with anything happening. And it's just a chance to vent because you can't vent your agonies to your chair or to your board. You share with them what's going on in the business that caused you angst. But if I'm not really getting along with you well, I need to talk to somebody about that. So most CEOs, when questioned, and I've seen this study from McKinsey, 80% of them say, I'd love to have a mentor, but it can't be from within the company, can't be a chair, can't be my directors, got to be external.
Here's a good complementary question. So, what is your view on the executive chairman roles working with the CEOs then?
The executive chair? I mean,
Yes.
you're not the chair, it's the combined chair CEO.
Actually, that's a good question. Is it? I'd say, reading Matthew's question, I would say it's two different people. It's not a combined role. So
Well, you only have one CEO, and if the chair is going to define him or herself as executive, I guess that's the CEO, and the other person becomes de facto the COO. If you're dealing with a combined chair CEO, as 40% of publicly traded companies in the United States are, then you hire a lead independent director. But to me, that's sort of a half of a role, not a full one, and not something I think is a good idea.
Here's a good question from Hani. Um, Knowing your expertise in corporate governance and leadership, love to get your perspective on Xerox as an example, a great company that has struggled to grow its revenue over the last decade. What do you think about the leadership challenges that they're faced as an example? And what key advice would you give to help them turn things around?
Yeah, I don't know Xerox, so I'd advise her to go into Gemini, ChatGPT, or Claude and ask the same question, and she'll get a very good answer. My apologies.
It it brings up a good question because one thing that you bring about AI tsunami is that there's a massive secular existential threat due to AI, and so CEO succession is going to be that very hot pivot point for the survival of tons of organizations over the next little while.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. If you get the wrong CEO, you're probably not going to survive. Mark Andreessen, the lead managing partner of Andreessen Horowitz, arguably the most successful venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, we asked him, Nick, my pal from Google, we asked Mark, what would you do for a normal corporation facing all of these pressures from AI? And without missing a beat, he said, well, that's easy. I just put the CTO in as CEO, and away we go. You got to get some leadership at the top that believes in this and is going to implement it without reservation.
Um,
One last one. We're coming up to 10 to the hour.
there's a bunch in here. Let me do a quick scan and maybe
Okay.
one or two more. Let's talk about CEO motivation for small organizations. So anonymous question: what are some ways you recommend to keep the CEO of a not-for-profit organization motivated?
Well, hopefully that person has a mission for his or her function. And I think you don't join a not-for-profit board unless you have a passion for its mission. So hopefully that's, hopefully the emotional attachment is deeply embedded by the time you get that CEO in place. If it's not, you're not going to stay there for cash, and you may not stay there if you have a rotten board. But if you've got a caring, compassionate, empathetic chair, and most of your directors care deeply about your organization, I don't think you worry about the leadership because nobody would take this job if it was just a day job that they were in.
What's your second last one? What's your take on the combined role of chair and CEO? Should it be, in your opinion, one or two roles?
Yes, it should be true. We make major exceptions in Canada for family controlled companies. That seems to work for a generation. The performance of family controlled publicly traded companies in Canada significantly outperforms all the rest. And the National Bank of Canada publishes that every quarter. But generally speaking, in a widely held corporation, the two roles have to be separate. It's the first thing we did in the Canadian Coalition for Good Governance. I went to Nick LePan at OSFI and I said, Nick, it's our view as shareholders that we should separate these roles. And he said, I absolutely agree with you. And I said, well, can I use that when I talk to the banks? And he said, absolutely. So we got most of the banks to move from a combined role to separated roles, I think within about 18 months. And because Canada has such a high degree of social transmission, there were 15 directors on each of those six bank boards. That's 90 directors. They were all on one or two other boards, and they sort of took this missionary idea of separating the roles, taking the fox out of the henhouse to their own organizations. So Canada has pretty much stopped having combined roles where there's not a family. And the United States still has 40% of its widely held public companies with a combined role. And when you ask them, it's American ethnocentricity. They say, what do you mean? What do you mean split the roles? We don't do that here. This is America. We have them combined here. Speak to Jamie Dimon. We don't split them. This is America. Well, we thought differently in Canada and we did it differently, and the results are different.
Last question, a great procedural one. So from Russell: if a board member wants to meet with a direct report of the CEO, how does the board member handle that? And should he advise the CEO in advance?
So I missed the first part of the question.
If a board member wants to meet with a direct report of the CEO,
Oh, okay. Should go through the chair. to go through the chair. Now the HR committee chair can speak to the chief HR officer. The head of the audit committee probably has a direct line to the chief financial officer. But I think if you're just sort of an ordinary ABC director, not chairing a committee, and you want to go meet somebody in the manufacturing division, the marketing division, I would, as a matter of courtesy, go through the chair, who would then talk to the CEO and either give you a yes or a no. But I think protocol is important in these relationships. In larger companies, the lines between management and the directors are pretty clear. Smaller the company, the more elastic they are. So, smaller company, who knows? It's just a question of your personal judgment. But at a certain size, I would use the protocol of going through the chair.
And I guess if there isn't a protocol, establish one so that this
No.
becomes a part of the.
Being a good value-added director is an art, not a science. There are no golden lights, shafts of light from above saying, always do this, always do that. Always use your own best judgment as to what is the appropriate approach in the circumstances you find yourself in. And context changes constantly.
I think that's it. Thank you
Okay.
everyone for attending.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. And we do have a website, don't we? We can steer them to.
Yes. So a couple of points of orders here. So our next event. Many of you have signed up through David's LinkedIn. You will now be joining the 3,000 other subscribers for David's board chair newsletter. You can visit boardchair.com. That's David's personal website, to find further information if you have specific requests, individual requests for advisory from David related to hiring the CEO or otherwise. We have an event on June 16th, I believe, with a regular with our group here, Nicholas Darbo-Garno. We wrapped up last year's AI Tsunami event series. David believes that AI is one of the most significant and monumental changes in history related to corporate governance and business, and wants to prepare fellow directors with that. We're going to be inviting Nicholas to talk about what's happening from his vantage point in the Valley.
Yeah, it's What's New with Nick is how I thought we might title it. What's New with Nick? Because he's in the middle of Silicon Valley. He's there every day. He knows what's going on right in the pot.
We've also been spending this year building out a number of booklets, a number of short books. The most recent book that we published, and about 60 of you signed up to provide feedback on the early edition, The Board Compass. This is an overview of everything related to being a value-added director and understanding a board. We're going to be using today's presentation to create another short booklet. And earlier this year, there was a presentation on board evaluations, how to go about doing a board evaluation. And so 3 booklets coming down the pipes. Really appreciate all your participation. This was one of the most highly attended events, so really grateful. Be on the lookout for the PowerPoint, the HBS, the Harvard Business School article, and a survey to give us feedback and to request to be on the receiving list for when the booklets are created. So on behalf of David, thank you.
Thank you, Quinn. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. Appreciate it.